On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. This week's On Story, writer and producer of Breaking Bad and co-creator of Better Call Saul, Peter Gould.
We thought about Frasier or Lou Grant or The Simpsons, which are all really successful spin-offs. To my eye, what those shows have in common is that they're different from the mothership. It's not just continuing on the work. You say that, well, that's a really different show. It's a different playing field. And that was, as we went, that was our hope.
In this episode, Peter Gould discusses the genesis of Better Call Saul's eponymous hero.
It wasn't so much there was an idea to do a spin-off of Breaking Bad. It was this character emerged more or less organically. It was not an easy sell creatively, at least for me, and in some ways not for Bob either. But Vince, it's almost as soon as Saul Goodman was introduced in season 2 of Breaking Bad, we started joking around about wouldn't it be funny to do a Saul Goodman spinoff. And some of the writers thought this was a great idea, and there were some other writers who will remain nameless who would, every time it came up, would go, Saul Goodman, really? And I heard both sides. And I also, personally, I was a little bit anxious about it. It seemed too good to be true. And I think, I don't want to speak for him, but I think Bob Odenkirk felt more or less the same way. It's just like, we're having so much fun on Breaking Bad. People are really digging it. Do we want to push our luck? And also, what would a Saul Goodman show be exactly? But Vince seemed to he just liked the idea a lot. And I think part of it was he loved the idea and he loved the character. And I think part of it for me, and I'm guessing maybe for Vince too, this is not something we've talked about a lot, is we really enjoyed working with the group. With as many of the people as we did on Breaking Bad, and so the idea of continuing on in keeping the band together, or as much of it as we could, was very, very appealing. And so it was something that emerged organically. The first thing we pitched to AMC and Sony was actually a half-hour single camera in the vein of a combination, I'd say, of MASH and Dr. Katz. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dr. Cabot. What that spoke to, I think, was our lack of understanding of the character. And once we started thinking about it more deeply, we realized if the only way you can have an interesting show is to introduce a series of problematic characters for your guy to solve, maybe that character is not interesting enough to support a TV show. Our intention when we started season 2 was that Tuco Salamanca was going to be the big problem for Walt and Jesse in season 2. And George Masteris wrote an incredible introduction for Tuco Salamanca in season 1. Of course, we brought him back on Better Call Saul through the miracle of flashback.
Open up, officer of the court! Open up in the name of the law! Good afternoon,
But what we found was when we started season 2, in season 2 we even began saying, okay, this is the episode when Tuco does this is the episode, and then we found out pretty early on, thank God it was early enough that we hadn't broken a lot, we found out we could not get Raymond Cruz. And so we had to suddenly reconceive season 1. And And in some ways it was terrible because we thought this character is great and we love seeing Walter White have to deal with this guy. But in other ways, it was wonderful because it put Walt and Jesse, it kind of put them out on their own, and they have to figure it out on their own. They don't have a super drug dealer to kind of be their boss. So what we had was these two guys who they're not idiots exactly, but they're certainly not ready to run their own drug empire. Vince came in and he said, "What if there's a guy named Saul Good?" Like Saul Good. And then another writer said, "It's Saul Goodman." And so it was Saul Goodman. So there was a vacuum on the show. Walt and Jesse needed somebody to escort them into the underworld. They needed someone to work as a sounding board. But there was also another kind of vacuum on the show, which I don't think we understood intellectually, because we don't tend to, the approach that we use doesn't tend to be about what's the tone of the show, what's the mix. It's about the characters. What do they do next? But looking back on it, when I look at season 1, a lot of all the characters kind of took turns embodying comedy. They took turns, but the one who did the most was Hank Schrader, played by Dean Norris. And what happened at the beginning of season 2, we go back to Tuco, is Hank, he had this horrible gunfight with Tuco, and then he was more shaken up than he knew. He had PTSD. And so it drained that character of comedy. And so in a weird way, looking back on it, Saul Goodman brought the comedy back into the universe.
What are you doing, detective? What are you doing talking to my client without me present? You sneaky Pete. Which is which? What did the Academy hire you right out of the womb? You guys get younger every... What'd you say to Babyface, huh? Did you say anything stupid? By anything stupid, I mean anything at all. Look at you, mouth open, vocal cords of Twitter. We'll talk about it later. Right now, you out. 10 minutes ago. Go on. There are laws, detective. Have your kindergarten teacher read them to you, right? Go grab a juice box, have a nap. Go on.
One of our biggest concerns was, how do we let the audience know that Jimmy McGill is not Saul Goodman? That this is a guy who is starting off trying to be a good guy. He's trying to do things the right way. He's trying to be more or less a decent person. And so really the first 2 episodes, we were thinking especially about Breaking Bad fans. How are they going to understand this guy's not, anytime he meets someone, he doesn't have some secret agenda trying to take them for a ride, which I think if you watched Saul Goodman, you might think that's who this guy is. And that's who we thought he was at first. So that was part of the reason why in episode 2 there was this whole event with Tuco and the Skate Twins. A lot of the time it's, how do you test this guy? How do you prove the character is who you think he is? It's a litmus test. He's got Tuco. He's probably going to eviscerate these 2 guys because they've crossed him. And Jimmy has a chance to get away, and he doesn't do it. Instead, he stays and argues them down from being killed to having their legs broken.
They're skateboarders, right? That's how they run their scam. They can't skate, you hit them where they live.
I break nothing. I'm gonna break their arms. I'm gonna break their legs.
When did we get onto arms?
I'm cutting their legs off.
We can go that way, but we were talking about breaking. I think we're heading in the wrong direction.
Okay. Break their legs.
How many legs?
2. They got 2 legs.
1 leg.
Each 1 leg each?
That was literally a solution to the problem. How do you show this guy's not? Because Saul Goodman, I think, first of all, he would have never been out there in the first place. But even if he were, if you said to Saul Goodman on Breaking Bad, I'm going to kill these guys, you can go now, he would just, okay, bye, I'm off. Jimmy McGill doesn't do that. If this is about a guy, about Jim McGill's moral descent, he's going to get more and more successful in some ways being bad. I mean, it's axiomatic. He's going to become successful by doing things that he shouldn't. One thing that keep in mind is that we look at the morality of what the characters are doing, and I think the audience does too. It's something that people, I don't think, always take very seriously. And we wanted to put that all in the context of the fact that this is all going to add up to nothing. He's not going to end up where he wants to be. Not that I think being in Omaha is a bad thing, or that running a Cinnabon is a bad thing, but he's having to hide who he is. Nobody's looking at him and adoring him. He's getting no attention. And it was partially that, and partially, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but when we originally started talking about the show, we said, well, and it ends the moment when Walter White walks in and says, Walter White walks into his office. That's the end of the show. And maybe that's not the end of the show. He does this thing at the beginning of episode 4, which will echo throughout the rest of the season, which is he takes money from the Kettlemans.
Okay, I'm thinking hourly here. Some special circumstances, so our elite tier pricing would be $950 an hour. Going off to 20 hours, 19,000.
That action, which seems kind of lighthearted in the moment, we took very seriously because he's really screwed up. He's really done something wrong there. But our question was, what do you do with that money? That was really the origin of, this guy loves getting his face out. He's trying to start a business. And if there's one thing that I love about the show, it's a lot of it is about trying to start a business.
Upon this rock, I will build my church.
I find that stuff fascinating. I find it fascinating how he improvises his way into a business, and then at the end, when you see him in episode 5, he's finally got the idea of doing elder law. And then, of course, there's Thomas Golbevic, our music supervisor, sent us that version of the Harry Lime theme, which, of course, is a reference to The Third Man when he's there with his new clients in this retirement home.
Hello there, James McGill, attorney at law. How are you this fine morning?
I'm just fine, and how about you?
Very good. Play fair.
And that, for me, sets up an interesting resonance with that character of Harry Lime, he's not morally ambiguous. He's just charming evil. He is way more evil than Saul Goodman ever got. I mean, that's one of the fun things that we permitted ourselves in this show that maybe we were too disciplined to do on Breaking Bad is to just go ahead and have the character refer to other movies. And we're all movie buffs, so we're able to do things like put the Harry Lime theme in or do a reference to All That Jazz. And the reason why we let ourselves do that is that the character of Jimmy McGill and Saul Goodman, they're both movie buffs, and you'll see some more of that next season for sure.
Jim, I think you are just the lawyer I need. Because I got me a case. Major, I say a major case. Are you ready to clear your calendar?
Ricky, I'm all ears.
I want to secede from the United States. Now, I got 1,100 acres of property here. Self-sustaining with solar power and wells, a sovereign state immune to the business-killing regulations of the country in which it geographically lies. We are going to be America's Vatican City.
That first half of that episode, or that first act, where Jimmy meets he meets the fellow who's trying to start his own country, and then he meets the inventor of the talking toilet, and then finally he meets the lady with the Hummels who keeps him waiting while that wonderful shot where the stair chair is descending in the background and it takes forever. That was as close to being comic as we let ourselves. We really did not want to try for comedy. We wanted to let it sort of emerge naturally. And that's partially because I'll speak for myself. I think I'm a more dramatic writer with an ironic bent than out and out comic writer. How we came up with those things, I think we were just sitting there saying, well, who responds to this billboard scam? If you think about, you read in the local paper that someone has, a lawyer has rescued a guy who fell off a billboard. Who's going to call a lawyer from that? And it's not going to be some guy in a three-piece suit who runs a bank. It's going to be someone who's watching the local news and who wants a good guy, or someone who they think of as a good guy. And so that was really the origin of all three of those characters. And then we had this feeling that the people who are watching local news are probably skew older. I don't want to say anything terrible about it. That's not a bad thing. And that was when we realized, well, wait a minute, maybe elder law is a good thing for this guy. This show did not become a reality until long after the last episode of Breaking Bad was shot, and it was 2013, and we finished shooting Breaking Bad, and then as I said, Vince and I started talking, and then pretty soon after that. We realized that it should be an hour. That was the big breakthrough for me. This is an hour, and the other big breakthrough, which we haven't mentioned, was let's have the most obvious thing in the world. Let's have Mike Ehrmantraut on the show. Can we get Jonathan Banks? And then once we had those elements, I started feeling like this is something that I'm really interested in and I'm excited about, and hopefully not contaminate what we did before. Like I said, these are two characters. They go together like chocolate and peanut butter. You have a character who can't shut up to save his life, and a guy who speaks as if each word cost him $100,000.
I guess you can. It's just, you assume that criminals are going to be smarter than they are. I don't know. It kind of breaks my heart a little. Not the loquacious sort, are you?
We can't all be as blessed as you.
And there's sort of a magic there. It's a classic pairing. The way he came on Breaking Bad was really that Bob couldn't make it for an episode in season 2. And so Vince, at the last minute, created this character of Mike. And we were lucky enough to get Jonathan. I don't think that Mike would have been who he became. He could have been like many of the other characters who kind of came in and came out very briefly. But Jonathan Banks brought a depth and a soul to this guy that we found fascinating.
I told him, you know what a cop fears most? More than getting shot, more than anything. Prison.
In some ways, we're telling two stories of descent. And that's one of the things, that's one of our challenges going forward. If the show lasts long enough, knock on wood, we'll get to see that whole process, and hopefully it won't make us all miserable. The big challenge for us, the single biggest challenge for us starting Better Call Saul, was that Saul Goodman on Breaking Bad seemed happy with himself. He seemed happy with his life. As we started thinking about it, we realized that how is that dramatic? What's the burr in his saddle? What's the little piece of, the piece of sand that makes the pearl? What's the problem that he's dealing with? What's he trying to solve in his life? And so the question was, what does he really want? Not what he wants in the moment, because, for instance, you could always say Saul Goodman wants money. But what a dull thing for a character. You want to look underneath. Why does this character want money? What's gnawing him from the inside? And I don't know that we answered it in a really straightforward way. But a big part of the answer came as we started talking about how does this guy become Saul Goodman? And the other question we kept asking ourselves, in addition to the question of what's bothering him, what does he really want, what is underneath that smooth surface, was the more global question of what kind of problem does becoming Saul Goodman solve? This character emerged because one of the things I look for in any character is what do they care about? What's their vulnerability? My feeling is if you don't know how a character can be hurt, if you don't know what that character has to lose, then you don't have a grasp on them emotionally. The character has to in some way, in my world, has to be vulnerable in some way. And the thing that creates vulnerability is having people who you care about. Because when we have people that we love, we're all hostages to fortune. So that was really where, especially the first new character emerged, which was Chuck McGill, and the idea of Jimmy, as he is now, Jimmy McGill, having this older brother who is as straight-laced as Jimmy is crooked. And that was the origin of Chuck. And the idea also of Chuck being dependent on Jimmy in the circumstance that we meet him. That was really exciting to us because it gave this character something outside himself to push against.
I wasn't gonna say this, but you are broke. I can't carry both of us. I've been trying like hell, but I can't.
You're saying what? You think you have to provide for me? I never asked you that.
You didn't have to ask, okay? I've been doing my damnedest, but the day of reckoning is here. Soon, Chuck, you're gonna be out on the street with all the electromagnetism in the world raining down on you. Now, please picture that, then tell me that money is beside the point.
It's initially conceived, Chuck, he was a character who was almost like a perfectly ethical baby. In other words, that Jimmy needed to take care of somebody, and this guy was he was as above board, as rigid in his morality as Saul Goodman would become non-rigid in his morality. What we found was, and I was lucky enough to be there when Vince and Michael and Bob shot that initial scene. This is a sidebar, but a lot of the time people ask, do the actors improvise their lines? And I think the thought underneath that is, I know these actors are so creative, I know that they're creating, but are they creating new words? And is that the only kind of creation they can do? And the truth is, that scene, and a lot of the scenes, is pretty much word for word what we wrote, but it didn't come out the way I expected. Chuck McGill, as played by Michael McKean, is a much more imposing character. He has enormous pride. He makes Jimmy in some ways a little boy by comparison. And there's a certain point in the scene, I'm talking about the very first episode of Better Call Saul, there's a certain point in the scene when he says, I will get better. He repeats it once early in the scene, he says, I'm gonna get better, so of course. And then the second time he says, I will get better.
And the two of you agreed that since, as everybody knows, you're going back to work any day now, that the firm should help you make ends meet.
That's correct, minus the sarcasm.
Hamlet's making you a chump!
I'm going to get better! I'm going to go back to work, and I'm picking up where I left off.
Michael went to a place that I wasn't expecting, because I was expecting him to be handling Jimmy the whole time. And instead, you saw that he was pained and prideful, and that he was somebody to reckon with. And after having watched that, and a couple of the other scenes that he did, we went back to the writer's room and we said, well, wait a minute, this guy is not just a helpless baby for Jimmy to take care of. This is a man with a brain. And then we started thinking, well, wait a minute, these two guys are brothers, and obviously Michael's a little bit older than Bob. How did that work? What was it like when they were kids? And we started seeing a dimension to the character that we had not noticed before, which is that Chuck has a lot of problems with Jimmy. Chuck maybe even doesn't really like Jimmy, which is something Marco says in episode 10. We did not realize that until we saw a few scenes shot. And this, to me, is one of the great things that people don't acknowledge about serialized television, because the actors can make a contribution, which is not typically when you think of the actors making a contribution, you picture them saying to the writers, "Oh, this doesn't work," or "This is, or how about if I say this instead of that?" And that's certainly a contribution that's valuable and interesting. But to my eye, the most significant thing that an actor can do is just really bring it and bring all of themselves to the character, and you watch this person embody the words that you've written and embody the scene that you've written, but to bring so much more depth to it. Because it's very hard to make the decision to end a show if it's successful. There's so many intangibles to success. But yeah, we have definitely talked about how many episodes, and I think it's a totally different show from Breaking Bad. It really is a different deal from Breaking Bad. But the thing that I think it shares is that it's telling a story that feels like it has an end point. And the end point may not be the one you expect, but that says that it's a limited story. It ends. It has an end. And I think that's something that hopefully we'll be able to pull off.
You've been watching a conversation with producer Peter Gould on Story. For more On Story, check out our free podcast at onstory.tv or search the iTunes store and get the book today, On Story: Screenwriters and Their Craft, on Amazon.